From courtside the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. And with you once again, I am joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka D for 3. Derek, we always give our best effort here on the NLSC Podcast, but we can't say the same for NBA teams sometimes. That's what's on our minds this week, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, this episode is all about the NBA's tanking problem, which has plagued the league for years. And Adam Silver says that he wants to do something about it. We will see if that's the case. But I also turn this into a community question, and we'll get to those responses at the end of the show. I asked the community, what is your stance? There should be no tanking in professional sports. It hurts the integrity of the game. Or, I don't like that teams tank, but the NBA makes it impossible not to. And lastly, it is acceptable and necessary. And I also asked the community, what would you do to fix this problem? And for the show, I actually brought an article, Andrew, and it's out of Dallas Today. And their slogan is, by the people, for the people. It's actually a well-written article published on March 1st, 2026. The title is NBA to Implement Anti-Tanking Rules for Next Season. League Commissioner Adam Silver says tanking problem is worse than ever as more teams rest stars to improve draft odds. So we are going to get into this in a moment, but I wanted to ask your personal feelings on the matter because your Chicago Bulls are heavily tanking.
Yes.
At the moment. And we've talked about this extensively on the NLSC Discord. I mean, is it even worth it to watch the games? Doesn't that ruin it, knowing that they're doing whatever they possibly can to lose as often as possible?
It does. It doesn't make for good basketball. It doesn't make it easy to cheer for your team when they're clearly in tanking mode, when they're just trying to bottom out and rebuild. And I have mixed feelings about tanking. I'm probably in the middle as far as the statements you put out there for the community question, because it is necessary, I think, to bottom out at some point. If you're stuck in mediocrity, if you can't make any moves, then there is merit in blowing it up. And there's tanking, Derek, and then there's tanking. There is trading away players, there's getting ready to overhaul a roster, there's being prepared to bottom out, hit the lottery, try and grab a star. That's fine. Every team has to go through a down period, and if there's 5 or 10 games left in the season, I get resting your stars, especially if they're banged up, and just saying, hey, we're going to put some of the young guys on the floor, give some players a chance. We're not going to have our most competitive lineup out there, but we are going to compete. I think that's tanking fairly ethically, if you will. It's when teams actively try to lose games. It's when they're actually in a game, but the stars or their best players don't play in the fourth quarter. They throw away the game. The veneer of competition is gone. The mask has slipped at that point. I don't like that kind of tanking where teams are actively trying to lose games. It's one thing to bottom out. It's one thing to say, we're raising the white flag. We're going to try to compete, but we're not going to put our best lineup out there, so we're probably not going to win a lot of games. We're not in a position to. We're trying to rebuild, whatever. But when you're actually strategically in games, holding stars out, trying to lose, not putting in that effort, that's really when tanking gets bad.
It compromises the integrity of the game.
Absolutely.
And this is how it was described by the journalist resource. Integrity of the game is the principle that sports or games are conducted fairly, honestly, and in accordance with rules, ensuring outcomes are decided solely by a player skill rather than outside influence, corruption, or cheating. It upholds ethics, sportsmanship, and the reputation of the sport, preventing match fixing, doping, and disrepute. And key components of integrity of the game include fairness and consistency, adherence to rules to ensure a level playing field for all participants, protection against corruption, prevention of match fixing, gambling-related influences, and cheating, ethical standards, promoting honesty, respect for opponents and officials, and good governance. And this is one of the big ones. Original purpose, maintaining the pure, unadulterated nature of competition. And when this is happening in the NBA. And when you can see the team's best players sitting out or being played sparingly, and you see bad coaching decisions being made that look completely deliberate, that is rigging a game, right?
Yes.
That is compromising the integrity of the game, but it's also rigging a game. You are intentionally losing. Competition is out the window. There's no reason to watch that. There's no reason to cheer for that, right? And I think that that's the big piece that a lot of people are missing that are okay with tanking, right? And I think that a lot of people say they're okay with it for business reasons. Well, we want the number one pick. But tanking in a sport is also rigging the sport. It's rigging the league. It's rigging the standings, right? Just like you wouldn't be okay with a player intentionally missing shots in order to lose a game or meet a spread, right? Stuff like that. This is the same idea, in my opinion. It's the same thing. You're intentionally losing. And I think it's a damn shame. And I think that it shouldn't be allowed. And I think if there's any hint of it, teams should be fined somehow. I don't know how they would do that. I don't know what the dollar amounts would be. But I think that it absolutely destroys, as we stated, the integrity of the game, the integrity of the league, the integrity of the standings, the stats, etc. You know, you have teams that, oh, well, they won 60 games. Well, you know, in today's NBA, 15 of those wins, maybe 20 of those wins could be against teams that are intentionally losing,
sure.
Right? Doesn't that impact the way you look at history and the way you look at the league in general and these players and the game of basketball and these teams? Like, it's a big, big problem. And there was a couple people in the Discord when we were having this conversation that said things, well, you have to understand the business side. He's trying to explain the business side or something along those lines. I understand the business side. I understand that the NBA, because of the structure, because the worst teams have the best shots at the highest pick, that teams probably feel forced to do this in order to increase their odds to get a better player and turn the corner and have a better team. I obviously understand the business side of it, but they got to figure something out, right? I don't think there's any acceptable way to lose games on purpose, to throw games, to rig games. I don't think you can have acceptance for that, period, at all. So I'm 100% against it in every way. And the NBA needs to find some way to combat it at this point.
Agreed. And, you know, it kind of reminds me of the video game arguments that we have about microtransactions and pre-order bonuses and other anti-consumer activities when it comes to basketball video games, or video games in general for that matter. And people say, oh, it's a business and this is how they generate revenue. And it's like, we get that. We understand. We understand why they're doing it. We just don't think it's good for video games. It doesn't help our experience. It detracts from our experience. Likewise, tanking hurts the NBA. We get it. We understand why teams are doing it. We just disagree with the practice. And once again...
Right, well, sport and competition gets thrown out the window, right?
Exactly.
If you're intentionally losing, it's not a sport anymore, right? It's not a true competition anymore. It's a rigged game, period. That is it.
And to clarify my earlier point about how I find it acceptable late in the season, that's the issue as well, is that it's happening very early in the season. And I know we're about 3/4 of the way through the 2026 season, so a lot of the season is already in the books, but there's still quite a bit of basketball to play, plus the play-in tournament, obviously. So it is very early to actively tank. Once again, if there's 10 games left in the season, 5 games left in the season, and a team is already in the basement, it's been a disaster of a season, the season is toast, they're headed to the lottery no matter what, you know what? Raise the white flag, rest some of your banged-up stars, your banged-up players, and give some of the younger players a run. Let the chips fall where they may. You're probably not going to end very strong. It may improve the draft stock. It may not. To me, that's okay. That's very late in the season. There's not much basketball left to be played. It's academic at that point. But with a quarter of the season left, or a third of the season left, a lot of basketball to play, a lot of jockeying for position with seeding, a lot that can happen. To raise the white flag at this point, to actively tank, to actively lose games, absolutely compromises competitive spirit.
And it's not only that, it's the fact that you can allow team management to get away with making bad decisions, which put them in a spot of poor quality, right? Where they're losing games, they're not able to make the playoffs. They didn't do a good job developing their young talent. Maybe they had some bad misfortune with injuries and whatnot, and then they made bad decisions around that, etc. But because these teams weren't able to put together competitive rosters, now they can freely tank for a season or multiple seasons at times to try to get better players and intentionally lose games. And we're somehow okay with that. Like, you're bailing out the Chicago Bulls by allowing them to tank for an NBA season in order to, hopefully get a top pick that changes their fortunes. And then what happens if they don't get that top pick, Andrew? Or they get that top pick and it doesn't pan out, then they just tank again, right? Well, we got to try again. Like, how do you fix it?
Trust the process.
Number two, you should be stuck. Number two, you should be stuck as a team trying to make what you have work. And that doesn't, include losing games on purpose. That doesn't mean throwing away seasons and whatnot. What you do is, if you made bad decisions and you don't have a good roster, you play your best players and you try to win every single game. You don't compromise the integrity of the game. You don't rig the games because you didn't do a good job putting together a roster or developing talent, right? So I think that's the other piece of this is, if you have a bad team, you have a bad team. And you know what? You tried your hardest every single night. Maybe you only won 18 games and you still end up at the bottom of the standings, right? If you ended up at the bottom of the standings, you're in the same spot, but you gave it your best. I just think it's short-sighted when people try to kind of stand up for it, or they're like, well, I'm glad they're tanking, or I'm glad this team is tanking and whatnot. So you're glad that they're intentionally losing. That just doesn't work for me. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. And I think you can draw a distinction between blowing it up and tanking. I mean, the Bulls gave out some bad contracts. They clearly assembled a roster that was mediocre, had a ceiling of mediocrity. They were mid at best, a play-in team for the last, 2 or 3 years, which is not good enough, especially for the money that they were paying some of those players. So I understand cutting your losses, trying to get rid of those players, trying to get something in return, although, again, they didn't get a great return, second-round picks at best. The lack of shrewdness is a staple of Bulls management for years now, since the breakup of the championship team, unfortunately. Even with their resurgence during the Derrick Rose era, brief as that was, they were not making as many shrewd moves as I would have liked. But there is merit in blowing it up, shedding those contracts while you can, making that mid-season trade, but the difference is still going out there and putting in the effort, trying to win with your terrible team. As you said, you're still going to end up at the bottom of the standings because you don't have the talent. You've made some smart decisions moving forward as far as shedding contracts and looking to the future, looking to reshape the roster. Obviously, you're hoping for a lottery pick to do that as well, but you still need to try. If you are actively losing games, once again, it's not competitive, it's against the spirit of the game, and it's not fun to watch.
Yeah, it's not sport. It's not true competition. It's just a rigged event. We're going to get back to the article in a second, but tanking isn't new. We know that. My 96-97 Celtics tanked. They were trying to get Tim Duncan. And ML Carr, the coach at the time, came out and admitted this years later. There was an article about it, and he was like, we were trying to lose as many games as possible, and there were some nights where David Wesley had it going, and he was playing really well, and knew they needed to lose that game, so he pulled David Wesley out, and they lost the game. Like, this isn't a new phenomenon. It's just gotten worse, right? But this has been going on for decades.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very well documented at the time, talking about how they were trying to lose games. Obviously, Tim Duncan was the big story, and the Spurs ended up getting him because they had that terrible year, everybody injured. David Robinson only playing 6 games that year. Sean Elliott hobbled for most of the season. Chuck Person, I think, missed the entire season, and he was still a quality role player at that point for them. So they definitely weren't in a position to be very competitive.
They also signed Dominique Wilkins for that season. And he actually had a good season. And I was reading some comments from Spurs fans. They were discussing that time in that season. And they stated that Dominique Wilkins, brought the excitement, and that he was at least something for them to cheer for, in that terrible season
A lone bright
that they
spot,
had.
yeah.
So getting back to the Dallas Today article, it states the NBA is planning to implement new rules to combat the growing trend of teams intentionally losing games in order to improve their chances of landing top draft picks. League Commissioner Adam Silver met with general managers and discussed ideas like protecting top draft picks, freezing lottery odds at the trade deadline, and preventing teams from picking in the top 4 in consecutive years. The move comes after the league fined the Utah Jazz and Indiana Pacers for conduct detrimental to the league after they rested star players, and as more teams tank to take advantage of a talented incoming draft class. Why it matters. Tanking has become an increasingly controversial issue in the NBA, with fans and critics arguing that it undermines the integrity of the game and rewards poor performance. The league is hoping these new rules will help address the problem and ensure that the draft process remains fair and competitive. The details. Among the ideas discussed to combat tanking, the NBA is considering protecting top 4 or top 14 plus selections in the first round, freezing lottery odds at the trade deadline or a later date, and preventing teams from picking in the top 4 in consecutive years. The league has already fined the Utah Jazz and Indiana Pacers for resting star players, a practice that has become more common as teams try to improve their draft position. And then it notes that on February 19th, 2026, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver met with all 30 general managers to discuss the issue of tanking. So what do you think of those ideas? Do you think they would be effective in, kind of curbing some of this tanking?
Potentially, yeah. I think you do have to do something at this point. It has gotten ridiculous. And it's funny because the lottery was supposed to be the failsafe against tanking, because getting the worst record doesn't necessarily mean you will have the top pick with the lottery when that came in. And indeed, the team with the worst record hasn't won the lottery every single year. So in that respect, it works as far as not necessarily rewarding the team with the worst record. So there's no guarantee of getting that top pick, or even a top 3 pick. We have seen teams with the worst 3 records drop to 4, 5, and 6 before, or at least one of them dropping out of the top 3. So the lottery is supposed to be that fail-safe measure, but obviously it's not enough of a deterrent, because you are still giving teams a pretty good chance of winning the lottery. So it's still worth hedging their bets, I suppose, and tanking. So obviously more needs to be done. Removing the protections around picks, or not allowing teams to pick in the top 3 or the top 5 in consecutive years, I think is worth considering. You look at when they brought in the lottery, the Orlando Magic won the lottery 2 years in a row, got Shaq in 92, then Chris Webber in 93, of course traded him for Penny Hardaway, but that's when they started changing the odds for the lottery. They amended the way the lottery worked. So this is what you have to do when there is an undesirable situation, when teams are finding loopholes. We've seen some of the changes to the playoff format over the years, as far as the division winners getting the top seeds in the conference. Once they expanded to 6 divisions, that didn't necessarily work out, because some years certain divisions were much weaker, so giving them a top 3 seed was no longer appropriate. So you absolutely need to keep evaluating these things, see how loopholes are being abused, and close them. So yeah, I think some of those measures are worth a try.
Yeah, I think fines are a good start.
Yes, that's where you start.
Nice to see some fines being handed out. I also want to point out that the NBA is a business, and it's an entertainment business, right? And I think entertaining the fans is part of that business and part of the obligation, right? And I think that when you have teams tanking for full seasons, which we've seen it for full seasons, because they knew they weren't going to win that year, right? They knew they didn't have the talent to win a championship, and they weren't even going to try. So they're tanking for full seasons. I think that also is absolutely terrible for the fans. I think it's disrespectful to the game and the fans. And I think that, there's fans that have season tickets, right? They're season ticket holders. They pay big money sometimes for good seats and whatnot. And games are expensive to go to anyway, even for some of the bottom teams. And, it's making it to the stadium as well, and getting home and all of that. And, what about the merchandise that people buy and all of that? I just think that there's a much bigger picture to this. And I think, like I stated, it's not just a disrespect to the game. of basketball and the disrespect to sport and competition. But also, I think you would agree, to the fans.
Oh, definitely. Much like load management is keeping stars off the court. Fans pay a lot of money to attend these games, don't even get to see the best players competing against each other. That's no longer a guarantee. And to have teams tanking, intentionally losing games on top of that, yeah, that's not fun at all. It is a spectator sport, so it should be a good product for the spectators.
The article ends with what they're saying, and it states, and this is Adam Silver, he says, the fundamental theory behind the draft is to help your worst performing teams restock and be able to compete. The issue is if teams are manipulating their performance in order to get higher draft picks, even in a lottery, then the question becomes, are they really the worst performing teams? And Mark Cuban states the NBA should worry more about fan experience than tanking. It should worry more about pricing fans out of games than tanking. You know who cares the least about tanking? A parent who can't afford to bring their 3 kids to a game and buy their kids a jersey of their favorite player. Tanking isn't the issue. Affordability and quality of game presentation are. And I completely disagree with Mark Cuban there, right? Yeah, basically he's stating nobody cares about tanking. The fan doesn't care about tanking. They don't care about the integrity of the game, all of that. And I have to say, I disagree. And yes, it is an entertainment business at the end of the day, but they're also playing a sport that is supposed to be competitive. And it's advertised as real basketball and real competition. So I disagree with him with the whole affordability and quality of game presentation are the most important. Also, very important to point out, if he's talking about game presentation, isn't he also talking about the on-floor product? Right?
You think so?
And if
yeah.
your team is intentionally, losing, I saw there was a team that had an average margin of loss of like over 15 points per game over an incredible stretch, and they were losing games by 20 and 30 and 35, etc. That's part of the game presentation, Mark Cuban, right? And if you're going to that game and they're not trying their hardest and it's not a real competition and teams getting blown out and all of that, yeah, that's BS.
I don't want to throw out what may be a bit of a hot take, but I don't think the play-in tournament actually helps competitiveness here, because we've gone from the top 16 teams in the league qualifying for the playoffs to the top 20 teams being in the mix at the end of the season. So you've got teams in the 9th and 10th place who in the past would be headed to the lottery, automatically at the end of the season. Now they've got to play that extra game. Now they're actually in the mix for the playoffs, which I don't think is a great idea in general. I think the problem with the play-in tournament, and this is a bit of a sidebar, I admit, is that it punishes the 7th and 8th seeds for not doing better, while rewarding the 9th and 10th place teams for doing even worse. To me, that's illogical. And you've also got these teams in 9th and 10th place kind of stuck in purgatory, where they're kind of in the lottery, but they're also in play of contention, that second bite of the apple at the end of the season. I think teams are trying to drop into that bottom 10 now, where it used to be the bottom 14 in the lottery. I don't know. I think the play-in tournament has some problems in general for the way that it messes with the playoff format, but I think it's also possibly forcing teams to tank to make sure if we really want to bottom out, we've got to make sure we're in the bottom 10, so we're going to lose some extra games. I don't know. I think the play-in tournament could be a factor.
I don't think that ever should have been added to the NBA schedule anyway. I think you would agree. Moving over to an ESPN article real quick. Solution for the NBA to fix its tanking problem. Count wins. And this is an article by Tim Bontemps on February 19th, 2026. And I'm actually going to fast forward in this article to an Adam Silver statement. It states, in 2 separate answers about tanking that came up in his annual All-Star Weekend news conference, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said incentives 5 different times. He stated, the incentives are not necessarily matched here. I think the tradition in sports where the worst performing team receives the first pick from their partners, when any economist comes and looks at our system, they always point out, you have the incentives backwards there. That doesn't necessarily make sense. And then there was an Eastern Conference executives that stated, until the league changes the system, teams are going to continue to lose if that's the best way. to get players. So there's that business side. Teams feel apparently like they have to tank full seasons and whatnot. It continues in much of the discussion on trying to fix tanking. The focus has been on trying to de-emphasize losing. Each idea, from removing the ability to protect picks in the middle of the draft lottery to abolishing the draft to completely flatten the odds, all would make it less desirable for teams to lose. What none of them do, however, is push them to win. But this plan does. Currently, the order of the NBA draft lottery is determined by which teams have the most losses at the end of the regular season. But consider, at a certain point in the regular season, say the All-Star break, things would flip. And for the rest of the season, a team's wins would go toward improving its lottery odds instead. That's not a bad idea, right? I actually like that idea, Andrew.
Yeah, my knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, is that going to reward the top teams? Are the rich going to get richer? Because I wouldn't want to see that. As much as the reward system is backwards as far as the lottery, I also think there'd be a problem if the top teams can just keep stockpiling talent. And of course, that also means that a lot of talented players end up having to play behind other talented players as well, and we don't get those exciting matchups around the league. So I wouldn't want to see that. But from the sounds of it, it would just be a way to reward the bottom-of-the-barrel teams for actually trying in the second half, kind of locking in that first half results, saying, okay, you're bottom of the barrel, you're way out of playoff contention. You know, if you try the rest of the way, it improves your odds. Interesting idea. Possibly could work. Yeah, I'm intrigued by that.
I don't think it's the best idea, but I think that it would force those bottom teams to try for the second half of the season, and I think that it would make the season a lot more interesting, right? And it would make those matchups a lot more interesting, and it would hurt the integrity of the game and the integrity of the NBA less. He does state in the article, one argument that has been levied against implementing the system is that it would be too impactful for teams at the bottom of the standings. But the fact that a Wizards team that went 9-45 before the All-Star break last season would still land in the top spot with a 5-23 record after it underscores that shouldn't be a significant problem. And again, the goal needs to be about creating a need for teams to try to win. And a Western Conference scout stated, anything that would reasonably incentivize teams to win is better for the fans, like I stated earlier, and a better outcome than teams need to have a star. And he continues, the more fun thing at the end of the day is what everybody is trying. So, yeah, I think that that's a good idea. I think that, you know, the around the All-Star break or the midway point of the season, maybe the bottom 10 teams, those teams now, they need to try to win for the rest of the season in order to increase their odds to get a better pick in the NBA draft.
And hey, you might see some underdog runs where teams that are kind of hovering around just on the edge of the bottom 10, you know, they make a run and they make the playoffs. Again, this is why I don't like to play in tournament, because it gives teams that don't necessarily deserve it that second chance at the end of the season. After 82 games, if you haven't qualified for the top 8, I don't think you should have that second chance. I don't like to play in tournament for many reasons. But, you know, under that system, incentivizing teams to win, to get that lottery pick, or possibly make that Cinderella run to the playoffs, have like a We Believe Warriors situation. Yeah, once again, that's what happens when the league is competitive and incentivized to compete.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a perfect system, though, because then you also have teams trying to fall into the bottom 10 in the first half of the season, right?
Yeah.
So you're still going to have the tanking element. It just wouldn't be, you know, for the entire season, and teams would be trying incredibly hard in playing their best players, you know, for the second half of the season. And like you said, it would be cool to see a team like that, you know, all of a sudden they're trying their hardest and bam, they increase their odds to get the highest pick in the NBA draft, and they found their way into the playoffs.
I will say that there is one major incentive to not tank and to try to win, and that, of course, is the Larry O'Brien Trophy. So there is always that incentive for teams to actually compete, but a lot of teams are admittedly mired in mediocrity, so it's kind of a tough spot, and tanking is a tough problem to address, but it does seem to be getting worse, so hopefully the league can do something about it.
Well, to any coaches that do this, what about the human element? You know, any managers that do this, owners, etc. Yeah, don't intentionally lose games in what's supposed to be a sport and real competition. How about that?
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
You've heard our stance on this, so let's get to the community's responses. Again, I asked, this week's NLSC podcast, we focused on tanking in the NBA. What is your stance? There should be no tanking in professional sports. It hurts the integrity of the game. Or, I don't like that teams tank, but the NBA makes it impossible not to. And finally, it is acceptable and necessary. And my follow-up question, which got the most responses, was, how would you fix the tanking problem that plagues the NBA? So first, Royce at Royce Brink 14, loyal listener to the show, gave a detailed response to the original question. He states, I don't think there should be any tanking in any professional sports league. It does hurt the league, whether they want to admit it or not. It just encourages fans to turn away from the league. To fix, I would pull the draft picks or money from a team if I could. I would also have to eliminate a draft lottery when one or more teams, like now in the NBA, are tanking. All the leagues tank and allow it. It is sick and sad. Drafts should maybe go back to worst record to best, but there should be safeguards in it for the fans. He continues, leagues should start thinking about their fans, but it is unlikely they will. The ticket prices, TV packages of games spread all over TV and streaming, or is it now the same? Cost and quality of fan appeal or merchandise, fanatics, cost of sports cards and video games. Quality of sports cards and video games, too. Bring back competition, having more than one sports league for video games. And I think he's talking about, Madden is the only, licensed football game out there. We have NBA 2K, the only licensed sim 5-on-5 basketball video game, MLB The Show for baseball, etc. He continues, card companies, fan appeal or merchandise companies also, make sports fun again, encourage integrity, play for fans and the players. I definitely agree with that last part. He says, end load management. If player is injured, then they can't play because they are hurt. Also replace commissioners and owners who think tanking is fine and encourage it. Also discourage the flopping, whining, and getting easy foul calls, SGA, LeBron, and others. And he ends with open up leagues to show appreciation for their past and the legends of the past. Make it like it used to be with throwback nights, jersey retirements, anniversaries of winning teams, not just the finals winning teams. Teams used to have reunion nights for other winning seasons. So detailed response. Thanks for getting into the community question, always listening to the show. But yeah, he is not happy with today's product.
No, and I feel the same frustration, that lack of respect for history, of tradition, even things as simple as the jersey designations. I know that's a very petty thing to harp on, but I do miss the old home and away designations and the consistency and the tradition there. And I know traditions are not necessarily the best reason to do something. This is why we make changes to formats and the league throughout the years. It is important to grow and evolve, obviously, but having some consistency with the traditions, having some consistency with the style, I think is important. I think there's just been too many changes like that, unnecessary changes, and it's gotten to the point where, we've added a play-in, and we've changed the way jersey designations work, and we've changed up the All-Star formats, but we've still got players flopping and complaining, and we don't have a consistent approach to unsportsmanlike technical fouls, or charging fouls, or other rules and approach to officiating, and of course tanking and a lack of effort during the regular season, or during the All-Star game especially. It seems like we've addressed every single problem but the big ones, and now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Moving over to Discord, Juicy Shack Meat and Shy Guy both state, I don't like that teams tank, but the NBA makes it impossible not to. Juicy Shack Meat expands. He states, I think the lottery should be abolished and keep the drafting order according to the end of the season standings. However, there could be a penalty enforced. ideally in some monetary value, if teams don't make the playoffs for a certain number of years. And then he finally states, I'm really just throwing ideas how to curb the tanking problem. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Start finding teams for sucking for too long. I think your Bulls would have faced a few fines by now.
Yeah, and of course, in other leagues around the world, there is relegation, where you may no longer be in the top tier of competition if you do suck for a season or a certain amount of time. I don't think they're going to relegate the Bulls to the G League and bring up the Windy City Bulls instead. I don't think it really works with the NBA and its structure with its minor league, its development league. It doesn't really work like that. But yeah, penalizing teams in some way for not competing, for intentionally losing games, for, as you said, rigging games, essentially, at the end of the day, is definitely appropriate. We've seen teams stripped of draft picks for under-the-table deals, for negotiating with players before the free agent period began. Obviously, the Minnesota Timberwolves lost a bunch of draft picks for the Joe Smith debacle, trying to sign him to secret deals with the wink-wink handshake promise that they'll give him a big payday once he qualifies for bird rights. So we've seen the NBA penalize teams for not being competitive or cheating or trying to circumvent the system, trying to rig the system in their favor. So yeah, fines at the very least and other penalties seem appropriate to me.
And it is rigging. Listen, if you're intentionally losing games, you're rigging the games. So I don't think there's any way around that. QB 1120 states, getting rid of pick protection seems to be the best move. Teams are not incentivized to lose to keep their pick and actually would want to win, so it won't be as good of a pick. The hard part would be, do you get rid of pick protections on trades that were already made? Or do you start now and all the trades from before are grandfathered in?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to grandfather those trades in. I think it'd be harsh to say, oh, those deals you made in good faith under that old system are absolutely null and void. I don't think that would be particularly fair. Maybe you could come to some kind of agreement, some kind of compromise with those trades. But if nothing else, I think you need to grandfather those in and say, okay, from here on out, none of those protections, or very limited protections anyway.
In response to how would you fix the tanking problem that plagues the NBA, it's Lil K2DB states, not a problem when your team tanks for a good player. It's part of the game at that point. No, it's not part of a game because you can't have a true game. It can't be sport. It can't be true competition if the game is rigged. So I completely disagree with him there, Andrew.
Yeah, like I said, if there's 5 games left, maybe 10 games at the most, if you want to raise the white flag, call it a season, give your best players a rest, especially if they're banged up, and just say, we're going to run with a depleted lineup, give the young guys a run. We're going to try, but we're probably not going to win a lot because we don't have the most talented lineup on the floor. I'm okay with that because the season is basically academic at that point. But tanking in the context that we're talking about here, rigging games, intentionally losing games, failing to compete throughout the year, yeah, that's not sport.
The X, also known as Andrew the X, states, it's Cobra theory, or a perverse incentive scheme. NBA wants talent spread across leagues, so giving worse teams best young talent should do the job. But it has had consequences because it incentivizes being bad to get best young players. So now NBA encourages teams to be bad to get access to best young players. To get reduced tanking, you need to remove the incentives. I would change draft lottery to include all teams in the league and just even odds, or slightly weighted 30 balls for worst, 29 balls for second worst, 1 ball for best. Draft lottery only determines top 4 picks. Rest are by standings and tiebreaker rules. I'd put a rule in place that you can only protect top 4 picks, since these are the only ones determined by draft lottery and are less likely to be able to be manipulated like other draft protections. I'd make these changes to pick protection immediately, though can't undo trades and protections already made. The draft lottery change would need to be gradual, so first reducing odds for non-playoff teams, then including play-in teams the next season, then including teams already knocked out of the playoffs by time of draft. Then, following season, you could include all teams in lottery. This part is very tricky and no way to do it without some benefactors. I like his ideas. I like what he's trying to do. He's basically stating, allow all teams to be part of that process, which could potentially reduce tanking. And yeah, he speaks to the issues with the current system.
Yeah, I can definitely see the point there. I'm just uncomfortable with the idea of the best teams also having a chance at stacking their rosters with the best talent coming into the NBA. And I know that's just how it goes sometimes, and obviously there are advantages with big markets being able to spend more money or being willing to go into the luxury tax, and of course having the appeal of location and other opportunities if players play in that city. But I don't really like the idea of the champion or a contender, one of the top teams in the league, being able to get even stronger, the rich getting even richer, if you will. I understand how the lottery is kind of backwards as a reward system, but I also think that making sure that all the best players keep going to the teams that are already really strong is also not great for competition, and it's not great for exciting matchups all around the league. So I'm never really going to be comfortable with the idea of every team being in the lottery.
So that's it for responses on Discord. Did we have any on Facebook?
Yes, we did have one response weighing in on Facebook. Chulo Manko says, tanking is not beautiful, yes. However, this is how teams get good picks in the draft. Tanking worked for the Thunder and the Pistons, current number 1 seeds, and has been practiced for decades in the NBA, so I say, let tankers tank and let contenders contend. And I do see the point there. Like I said, though, there's tanking and there's tanking. There's bottoming out and being willing to accept that you're entering that rebuilding phase and shedding some bad contracts and hoping that the draft is one of the ways that you can get some fresh talent, possibly a franchise player. But once again, that's different to actively tanking throughout the year, intentionally losing games.
If you're not trying to win, it's not sport anymore. It's not a true competition anymore. It's a rigged game. Why play it, right? You're trying to lose. Your intention is to lose the game. Then why play it? It no longer becomes a sport. So I don't agree with the whole let the teams that want to tank, let the teams that want to contend. All NBA teams, all professional sports teams, if it's labeled a true competition, you're out there to compete. You're out there to win, and you're out there to give it your best. Otherwise, the competition piece, the sport piece, is completely thrown out the window, and I consider it rigging. So, I don't think there's any acceptable form of tanking. So thank you to the community for all the responses. The community didn't tank the question, Andrew. They gave it their best. And as did we. We didn't tank the show. We gave it our best, and hopefully you enjoyed listening.
Absolutely. Love the insight that everybody provided, whether we agree or disagree. It's a tough issue, Derek. Just like getting competitiveness back in the All-Star game throughout the regular season, there are no easy answers, but the NBA definitely has to try. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in, and a reminder that you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media and would appreciate a follow. So, Derek, go and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-Live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.